With Ultra Custom Night's in-game leaderboard system, competition should be anything but surprising. However, in the days where the game was being updated almost daily, no score stayed on top of the leaderboard for long. Techniques and bugs were found and developed to elevate the high score beyond a simple UCN clone to something so chaotic that if you saw it today, you would have no idea what game this was. So allow me to take you through the journey of the high score and how it became what it is today, and some of the runners, techniques, and strategies that helped us get to that point. In the first versions of the game, people that had beaten Camille's other games on all max mode decided that they were going to do the same with Ultra Custom Night. However, as we know now, 120 mode was not meant to be possible right off the bat. But that didn't stop these players. People like Frogger25, DJ Oof, and even Sundex all decided that they were going to attempt to beat 120 mode. And even though they didn't beat 120 mode in that first version, mainly due to time, they pushed the number to over 90, but these runners, they had the skill needed to beat these insane nights. But time might not have been on their hands, for you see, these strategies used to get these high scores were similar to that of Ultimate Custom Night's 50-20 mode. Very similar, in fact, mainly because nobody had seen any Ultimate Custom Night game where the strategy was super different from the original. So there was a lot of skill, and these runners knew what they were doing. But eventually, after a few weeks, they realized that with the game being updated almost every day, in fact, that they couldn't keep the top spot on this leaderboard forever. And without having a lot of time, it just simply fell behind them. And it's not like these runners stopped trying. They kept shoving their amazing strategies and gameplay from Ultimate Custom Night into Ultra Custom Night. However, some other runners would come in and they would shake the game's gameplay from the Ultimate Custom Night base into new strategies in basically a new game entirely for high score runners. And they had strategy, but they also had time, which was the main thing you needed to stay on top of this leaderboard. This next era of high score runners, per se, had not only the skill shared with the originals, but also had the missing time on their hands, but they varied it from Ultimate Custom Night's 50-20 mode. The two main players from this point in time were Antken and Skyrim, and these players were skilled to say the least. They could play in the dark for the first 30 seconds of the night, which is the most frantic time, and they could simply do it blindfolded. So, to say they were good at the game would be an understatement. And they were developing strategies and new ways to beat a night when a huge roadblock stood in their way in the form of version 1.2.2. This version was a response to people saying that the game was too easy for high score runners, so therefore a lot of characters got buffed, and high score running became almost impossible. And for that day, mostly, before it was fixed, no high scores were even added to the leaderboard because of the difficulty with it. And even though it only lasted for a short amount of time, it set a principle as to how unstable this game was, and the coding errors that came with some of them that were eventually exploited to get high scores. And so runners had to be prepared for whatever kind of difficulties would stand in the way of progress. But as the second era of high score running progressed, a way they differed it from the original Ultimate Custom Night strategies was the use of anti-strats. As an example, Heat was a very early anti-strat, and I'd say even the first, where Camille Firma, the game's developer, basically said, okay, if you guys are going to keep the office cool to deal with all of these characters, then I'll make characters that only attack you if the office is hot. So, by that point, after too many characters got added that required you to keep the office hot, why even waste the resources to keep it cool when you could get more points from keeping it hot? And a lot of strategies got developed like this, such as the global music box and even the power generator, which in the beginning seems like a vital mode to use, and you would even be using it for most of the night. So by that point, anti-strategy was the name of the game, and a lot got developed, changed, and by that point, it was quite different from the original game, and some minor strategies got developed here that simply let high score runners get more points and be crazier than ever before. So as this development was happening, a huge update came into the game in the form of version 1.4.3. And what you have to understand about version 1.4.3 was that the high score jump between them was insane, to say the least. On 1.4.2, the highest possible score was 36 to 37,000 points. And although that seems like a lot, nowadays it's practically nothing. But in the next update, 1.4.3, the high score average was 40 to 41k. So the highest jump there was amazing. And a lot changed in that time. A new system got added, which was cheesed and exploited by high score runners to give them more points. And a more notable thing is that the trash in the game was separated, which for our purposes means that Mr. Kandu was added. The way Mr. Kandu works is he will make ventilation errors twice as common during a night if you use him correctly. And we'll get into more detail about that, but fundamentally, he changes the game, and he definitely changes the way high score runs are played today. An anti-strategy was used with coins, and a doorless strategy, even though not viable at the time, was an anti-strategy that would definitely begin to see more light as it became easier with more characters that worked against the door. Power-ups were even added, which, although could have helped, were simply pointless. They didn't do enough to affect a run. And it was about this time where the next era, per se, of high score runners would come into effect. And even if they did, the development from players like Skyrim and Ken would not be forgotten, as they shifted the focus from an Ultimate Custom Night fan game to a completely different strategy that is how we play the game today, and the most optimal. So before we move on in this next set of runners, allow me to talk about the Kandu glitch. I referenced it earlier and said I would go into more detail, and well, now is that time. As stated previously, Mr. Kandu disables the ventilation if you quote-unquote activate him by cutting his string. However, runners found that if you cut the string really early on in the night, at the right time, then he'll just break the ventilation. And although it was found before, and some people did use it, this next set of runners prominently used it, and still use it today to get their high scores. And so, a huge shift in the runners began to emerge, especially with some of the later updates, because as more points were added, 1.4.8 rolled around, and this solidified one runner into the
While the other major gamers were still raising the bar, one smaller runner got a run that would change the history of the game itself. This player was Evion Gamer 27. Evion was a high score player, but his scores were much lower than the others, which is why he wasn't really mentioned before. Suddenly, he got 45k. This was leaps and bounds above the next highest score, 43k. How did he get this? Well, days before he had been attempting 40k runs, when he noticed it took longer than before to die after the ventilation went out. Wondering how this worked, he tested every character that was new to his strategy, and eventually found that Virtual Helpy was the cause of this bug. Virtual Helpy's mechanic was very simple. Sometimes after lowering the monitor, he would appear and steal it. You have to pull a lever to get back your monitor. But what happens when you don't pull the lever is very interesting. When the ventilation goes out, Normally the game will flip the monitor up and down until you die to a character who attacks when the monitor is up. With the monitor stolen, that threat is completely removed. The ventilation going out only stops you from using the mask and makes your screen completely black. Once Evion figured this out, he managed to snag first by quite a bit, without really doing much skillfully, just getting good RNG. People celebrated until he revealed how he had done it. Whether or not you believe this is cheating or using the game's mechanics to your advantage, it would change the course of the game. The next update, released soon after the glitch had been revealed, made Virtual Helpy give you back the monitor once the ventilation goes out. This makes his mechanic kinda pointless, since he now gives you back the monitor once you actually need it. The update after that changed ventilation to now kill you if it is not fixed. A pretty controversial response to the Virtual Helpy bug.
So, after that, Evion Gamer and then another runner known as Ketsuk and also Mutant began running the game as the other runners simply didn't want to play it anymore. And as more strategies began to develop, 1.5.0 rolled around, which, for our purposes, added Nightmare Freddy. And Nightmare Freddy's mechanic is simple. It is that he would appear in your office and you would click on a clock in his hands, and then you would go into a cutscene where you woke up from a dream and then you began the night again from the same time that you left off. However, this was broken as all hell. Nightmare Freddy resetted the night, so every time-based character was reset and put back into place, which also meant 1 AM would come around at the same time as some other characters, and the point is, points were added a crazy amount, and the night became a minute shorter. So, then we got 1.5.1, and this update added a lot of free points. The score margin was upped to a particular amount, which added 3k from the previous version, so take that as you will. 1.5.2 and the preceding versions kept adding more and more stuff, and as time went on, more and more points were accumulated until 50k was possible. And you know, Mutant, who was a prominent high score runner at this time, began to step back from the game after 50k, and I can't blame him. It's a nice round number and a good place to end it off on. But 1.6.1 removed Nightmare Freddy's effect officially, and a few more characters got added, and by 1.6.1 doorless became a very viable strategy, which simply didn't let you use doors. Shockless became another prominent strategy where you didn't use the shock. So by that point you might as well have not been doing anything aside from dealing with characters as they come. But at this time a split began forming. A prominent runner began to take a different path from the main runners, using a completely different strategy. This strange figure is known as Purple, and he basically uses the GPS to his advantage, taking out all of the GPS characters in one simple move and changing out the rosters in between the main high score runners to allow for a totally different and unique strategy opposed to most of the runners. And so now, here we are. High score running has, well, I almost want to say it's stagnant. As of now, plans are formulating to have the leaderboard all filled with one particular number, which I have already achieved. Actually, to do this, I have gotten the top score on the leaderboard, so take that as you will. And it doesn't seem like many of the high score runners are going to keep going after this. But, you know, even if they do stop, I encourage you, whoever you are, to take the time to try to push past that number. I got the high score, and it took me a few days. As a matter of fact, it helped me grasp the strategies now as opposed to the ones that were there a year ago, and I encourage you to push past that number and show some new names on the leaderboard, because the people I've talked to, they're great. The strategies and the gameplay that these people use is beyond my comprehension, and explaining it here has been enough of a challenge on its own. But the elevated status of Ultra Custom Night leaderboard running is something that is insane now compared to it was a year ago, and has truly developed past the point of normality into a arguably fun thing to do. While doing it, I simply got to let my mind free of anything and just simply brute force the game, and it was amazing. And there we go. So sorry this video took so long to make. It was like a month in the making. A lot of stuff got in the way, but God, I got to talk to a whole bunch of high score runners to make this video possible, and if you want to check out their gameplay, which I used in this video, then go into the description. Every one of the channels I could find is down there, and I thank them all for helping me. This was a very basic overview into high score running. Of course, there's a lot more to it, but you can talk to me or some of the other high score runners to help understand that more, and if you want to run it yourself, then I'd recommend that. But as for the next video I had planned, I already have a full idea fleshed out, and hopefully it should be better and faster to make. But yep, thanks so much, and bye-bye!